Voters are worried about putting food on their tables and gas in their tanks. Joining me right now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer, who sat in on Trump's address to senators on Thursday. Senator, it's great to have you this weekend. Thank you so much for being here. What did you make of former President Trump, and what did you get from his agenda on the economy, energy, and what are your thoughts on that idea to replace income tax with tariffs?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it was a wonderful meeting. It was a very upbeat meeting. Not surprisingly, he's eternally optimistic, which is contagious to all of us. And the unifying message was very strong. And you're right. The meeting with senators focused a lot on the economy. It focused a lot on inflation within the economy. In fact, he went so far as to say, when I say inflation, I'm talking about the economy, which I think demonstrates that common sense that he talks about. The economy is not just about Wall Street. As much as we love Wall Street, it's about Main Street. It's about middle class and working class Americans. And Donald Trump, the billionaire from Manhattan, has done more to bring middle class America back into the Republican fold than any president in my lifetime, at least since Ronald Reagan. So I liked the discussion with regard to replacing the income tax with tariffs, or at least primarily. We have a couple of issues with that. One is, first of all, Donald Trump has taught a lot of us free market traders, free trading Republicans, that there is a role for tariffs. I've never seen tariffs as necessarily a revenue source to fund the government as much as a trade tool to enforce the rules of the game, if you will, particularly with cheaters. And that's where he's used them so effectively, whether it's China dumping steel on our market, Mexico dumping sugar on our markets. And when you use tariffs, in my view, it's not just about the revenue source, but doing business with your adversaries versus your allies and your friends. And so you'd have to do it in a very precise way, I think. But Maria, ultimately, tariffs should change the behavior to the point where you wouldn't have so many tariffs. You'd have a booming economy because more things would be made and produced right here in the United States. That, and then the fact that the Constitution does, in fact, have income taxes as the primary source of revenue for our country. It would get complicated, but again, he's stretched me a lot further than I ever thought I'd be on this.
What did President Trump say about regulation? I know that during his term in the last presidency, this was one of his major tools to sparking economic growth, just taking regulations down and unshackling corporate America.
I would submit to you, Maria, and I think President Trump would agree, that regulations are a bigger burden on investment and on the American economy than even high taxes. And what he did with regulations, which is exactly the opposite of what Joe Biden has done with regulations, I think can unleash the American economy like nothing else. I mean, right here in North Dakota, where most of our oil is not under federal land, I think we're a pretty good illustration of what happens when you have a more balanced regulatory and tax regime than the out of balance one that the Biden administration used. And Biden administrations used regulations and taxes to punish success rather than to incentivize success. And Donald Trump just intuitively understands this. And again, back to his geopolitics, he understands that there's nothing meritorious about transferring your climate guilt to polluting countries in any way, shape, or form. And so he talked a lot about energy policy in the context of this inflation problem, and rightfully so. I mean, energy is up way more than everything else cumulatively. I mean, electricity is up 28% from when he was president. Gasoline's up 55% from when he was president. So he understands it intuitively, and so do the American people, by the way.
Yeah, and that's not the only rules and regulations that we're talking about. You're co-sponsoring a bill introduced by Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to bring an end to Biden's woke social experiment. It aims to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the federal government. The legislation includes repealing Biden's DEI executive orders, getting rid of the DEI trainings, outlawing mandatory DEI pledges, and preventing federal contracts from being awarded to businesses that employ DEI practices. How realistic is this? And tell us about this.
Yeah, well, I think it's fairly realistic, only because I think what you're seeing is the DEI experiment in many places is already fading. Well, the thing about DEI is that it eliminates the diversity of ideas. While it may force the diversity of how somebody looks or what they think, it doesn't with how they actually intellectually process and apply their intellect to the job. Everybody's looking to apply this weird standard that has nothing to do with profit or the economy or outcomes, rather than than sticking to their knitting, as Jay Powell likes to say.
Senator, I know North Dakota voters passed a measure this week banning anyone from the state from running or serving in the U.S. House or Senate if they are or will turn 81 years old during their term. This new age limit is seen as a test case for the country. Do you think your state was motivated to do this after seeing Joe Biden's current condition at 81?
Well, I hope it had more to do with him than it did with me, because I'm only 63 and I'm not going to be 81 by the time I leave. But yeah, I do think that. I think that's exactly what's motivating people. But I think it's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, quite honestly. First of all, our system is built on choice. And the great thing about self-governance is we can fire our elected officials and not give them longevity, and we should probably do more of that. But that's up to us as the voters, in my view. Then I look at a guy like Chuck Grassley from Iowa, a senator who's 90 years old, and it'd take two 45-year-olds to keep up with the guy. So I don't think it should be about the age. I think it should be about the decision of the voter. They ought to maybe, consider age as one of the factors. I don't think it stands up to constitutional scrutiny. It may be a test case, but I believe it'll be a long time before it's tested, because I'm not going to be running when I'm 75 years old. I don't know whether my colleague John Hoban is or anybody else will be. But at some point, that moment will come, and then there'll have to be a challenge to the constitutionality of that decision.
Well, let me ask you this, Senator. Would you support term limits?
I don't, because I think term limits are sort of like the age limit. It reduces choice, and our system's not built on reducing choice. Why you'd want to voluntarily reduce your choice, I don't know. But again, I've never stayed in the same position long enough to be impacted by it personally. I do understand the frustration people see. But, when you look at, I think the House of Representatives right now, there's only like 87 out of the 435 that were in the House of Representatives when the Trump tax cuts passed. So when you think about that level of turnover, our system works pretty well. The problem, Maria, is that so many of the higher profile leaders in Congress are the ones that stick around the longest, and they become a bit of the face of the Congress. But, so I understand people's frustration with it. I've never been a big fan of limiting my choices.
Senator, it's good to have you this weekend. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you, Maria. Always a pleasure.